2,000 years ago, when Rome ruled the Mediterranean and the Han dynasty controlled the vast territories of China, an extraordinary network of trade routes began to emerge across the hostile landscapes of Central Asia. This was not a single road carved through stone and sand, but rather a web of pathways that would eventually connect two ends of the known world, carrying far more than silk and spices between distant civilizations. The morning sun rises over the Gobi Desert today much as it did 20 centuries ago, casting long shadows across endless dunes that have witnessed the passage of countless caravans. The wind still whispers through the ruins of ancient way stations, where merchants once sought shelter from sandstorms and bandits. But if you listen carefully to that desert wind, you might still hear the echoes of tinkling camel bells, the voices of traders haggling in a dozen different languages, and the footsteps of explorers who dared to venture into the unknown. What we now call the Silk Road was never known by that name to those who traveled it. German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen coined the term in the 19th century, but to the merchants, monks, and adventurers who risked their lives crossing these treacherous routes, it was simply the way to the west, or the path to the Middle Kingdom. They could never have imagined that their dangerous journeys would fundamentally reshape human civilization, spreading ideas, technologies, and beliefs across continents in ways that still influence our world today. Picture, if you will, a Chinese merchant in the year 200 CE, standing at the gates of Chang'an, the glittering capital of the Han Empire. In his wagon, carefully wrapped in protective cloth, lies the most precious commodity of the ancient world, silk so fine it seems to capture light itself. This fabric, created through secrets jealously guarded by Chinese artisans, could make him wealthy beyond imagination if he can successfully transport it across 4,000 miles of desert, mountain, and steppe to reach the markets of the Roman Empire. But our merchant faces a journey that would challenge even modern travelers. Ahead lies the merciless Taklamakan Desert, known to locals as the place where you enter but never leave. Beyond that, the towering peaks of the Pampas, where the air grows thin and avalanches can bury entire caravans. Bandits lurk in mountain passes, ready to kill for a single bolt of silk. Local rulers demand tribute for safe passage through their territories. Disease spreads quickly in cramped caravanserais where travelers from every corner of Asia crowd together for protection. Yet despite these dangers, our merchant will likely make this journey, just as thousands of others did before him and thousands more will do after. The rewards are simply too great to ignore. A single successful expedition can set up a family for generations. More importantly, there is something irresistible about the unknown, the possibility of discovering new worlds beyond the horizon. What drove these ancient entrepreneurs was more than mere profit. They were the first truly global citizens, comfortable negotiating with Sogdian middlemen in Samarkand, sharing meals with Bactrian camel drivers in Kashgar, and marveling at the strange customs of Persian fire worshippers in Merv. They spoke multiple languages, understood diverse currencies, and navigated complex cultural protocols that could mean the difference between a profitable transaction and a violent confrontation. The goods they carried tell a story of human ingenuity and desire. From China came not only silk, but also tea, paper, gunpowder, and porcelain so fine that European nobles would later pay fortunes for a single cup. Moving eastward were the famous horses of Fergana, so prized by Chinese generals that entire wars were fought to acquire them. Glass vessels from Roman workshops, carpets from Persian looms, precious stones from Indian mines, and aromatic spices from the islands of Southeast Asia all found their way along these ancient highways. but perhaps the most precious cargo was invisible: ideas. Buddhism traveled from India to China along these routes, transforming both cultures in the process. Mathematical concepts, including the revolutionary notion of zero, spread westward from Indian scholars. Chinese inventions like papermaking and printing would eventually reach Europe, sparking intellectual revolutions that changed the course of history. Even diseases moved along these paths, sometimes with devastating consequences that reshaped entire populations. The Silk Road was humanity's first experiment in globalization, creating connections between civilizations that had never imagined each other's existence. A Roman senator wearing Chinese silk had no idea that his garment began as cocoons tended by farmers in distant Sichuan province. A Buddhist monk praying in a cave temple near Dunhuang could not have known that his faith originated in the teachings of a prince in ancient India. Yet these connections were real and profound, creating a web of interdependence that spanned continents. Today, as we grapple with our own interconnected world, the lessons of the Silk Road seem more relevant than ever. These ancient traders and travelers showed us that cultural exchange, despite its challenges and conflicts, ultimately enriches all participants. They demonstrated that commerce and curiosity could overcome seemingly impossible barriers of geography, language, and custom. Most importantly, they proved that human beings have an irrepressible desire to connect with one another, to share their stories and dreams across any distance. This is the story we will explore together, not just a tale of merchants and money, but an epic of human courage, creativity, and connection that changed the world forever. The year is 138 BCE, and the Han Dynasty has reached the zenith of its power under Emperor Wu, known to history as the Martial Emperor. Within the walls of Chang'an, the largest city in the world at that time, a remarkable conversation is taking place that will change the course of human history. The emperor, surrounded by his advisors in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, is contemplating a problem that has plagued China for generations: the constant threat of the Xiongnu, a confederation of nomadic tribes that regularly raids Chinese settlements along the northern frontier. The Xiongnu are not merely bandits or opportunistic raiders. They are skilled horsemen who have mastered the art of mounted warfare, striking swift and deadly blows before disappearing back into the vast steppes of Mongolia. Their leader, the Shanyu Mao Dun, has united these scattered tribes into a formidable military force that can field over 300,000 mounted warriors. For decades, Chinese generals have struggled to counter their mobility and ferocity, often suffering devastating defeats despite superior numbers and equipment. It is in this context that a young court official named Zhong Qian steps forward with an audacious proposal. He has heard rumors, whispered by captured Xiongnu prisoners and foreign merchants, of distant peoples called the Yuezhi who were once powerful enemies of the Xiongnu. According to these stories, the Yuezhi were driven westward by the nomads after a series of brutal wars, but they remained strong and harbor deep resentment against their former tormentors. Zhong Qian proposes to undertake an unprecedented mission, to travel beyond the known world, find these mysterious Yuezhi, and forge an alliance that would allow China to attack the Xiongnu from two sides simultaneously. Emperor Wu, intrigued by this bold plan, grants Zhong Qian permission to attempt this seemingly impossible journey. What neither the emperor nor his brave envoy realizes is that they are about to set in motion a chain of events that will create the greatest trade network in human history. Zhong Qian's mission, though it will ultimately fail in its military objectives, will open doors between East and West that will never again be closed. The expedition that departs Chang'an in 138 BCE consists of barely 100 men, including Zhong Qian himself, his trusted Lieutenant Gunfu, a handful of guards, and various servants and interpreters. They carry gifts for potential allies, supplies for what they hope will be a journey of several months, and most importantly, detailed instructions from the emperor about the terms of the proposed alliance with the Yuezhi. None of them has any real conception of the distances they will need to cover or the obstacles they will face. Almost immediately, the expedition encounters problems that would have discouraged lesser men. The western regions beyond China's borders are not empty wilderness but rather a complex patchwork of kingdoms, tribal territories, and nomadic hunting grounds, all controlled by peoples with their own languages, customs, and political agendas. The route westward leads directly through territory controlled by the Xiongnu, the very people Zhong Qian hopes to outflank through his diplomatic mission. Predictably, the Chinese expedition is captured within weeks of leaving familiar territory. Zhong Qian and his men are brought before the Shanyu himself, who is both amused and alarmed by their audacious plan. Rather than executing them immediately, as might be expected, the Xiongnu leader decides to keep Zhong Qian as an honored prisoner, perhaps hoping to extract useful information about Chinese military plans or to use him as a bargaining chip in future negotiations with the Han court. What follows is one of the most extraordinary episodes in the annals of exploration. Zhong Qian spends 10 years in captivity among the Xiongnu, during which time he is treated relatively well and even given a nomad wife who bears him children. But despite the comfortable circumstances of his imprisonment, he never abandons his original mission. He studies the customs and language of his captors, memorizes the geography of the regions through which they travel during their seasonal migrations, and carefully observes their military tactics and political organization. More importantly, Zhong Qian begins to understand something that Chinese civilization had never fully grasped. The vast world that exists beyond their borders is not a barbarian wasteland but rather a complex network of interconnected peoples, each with their own sophisticated cultures, technologies, and trade relationships. Through conversations with fellow prisoners, captured merchants, and nomad chieftains, he begins to piece together a mental map of Central Asia that extends far beyond anything previously known to Chinese geographers. The Xiongnu themselves, Zhong Qian discovers, are not isolated primitives but rather active participants in a web of relationships that stretches across the steppes and deserts of Inner Asia. They trade with settled peoples to the south, exchange goods and information with other nomadic groups, and maintain diplomatic contacts with distant kingdoms that Zhong Qian has never heard of. Through them, he learns of the Sogdians, master traders who control much of the commerce in Central Asia, of the wealthy cities of Bactria with their Greek-descended rulers, and of the mysterious lands beyond the great mountains where precious stones and exotic goods can be found. In 129 BCE, after a decade of patient waiting, Zhong Qian finally sees his chance for escape. Taking advantage of a moment of inattention during a festival celebration, he slips away from his captors along with Gunfu and a few other surviving members of his original expedition. Rather than attempting to return directly to China, however, he decides to continue westward in pursuit of his original mission to find the Yuezhi. The journey that follows is an epic of endurance and determination that rivals any tale of exploration in human history. Zhong Qian and his companions travel through landscapes of stunning beauty and terrible danger, crossing high mountain passes where the air is so thin that men and animals alike struggle for breath, traversing desert valleys where the heat is so intense that they can only travel at night, and navigating through territories controlled by peoples who have never seen Chinese faces and regard them with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Along the way, Zhong Qian becomes perhaps the first person in history to document systematically the cultures and resources of Central Asia. He observes the irrigation systems that allow agriculture to flourish in desert oases, studies the breeding techniques that produce the magnificent horses prized by nomadic warriors, and learns about the crafts and technologies that make each region unique. Most importantly, he begins to understand the economic relationships that bind these seemingly isolated communities together. In the kingdom of Dayuan, located in what is now the Fergana Valley of Uzbekistan, Zhong Qian encounters horses unlike any he has ever seen. These animals, which the Chinese will later call heavenly horses, are larger and more powerful than the sturdy ponies used by Chinese cavalry. They sweat blood, a phenomenon that modern veterinarians now understand is caused by parasites under their skin, but which seemed magical and supernatural to ancient observers. Zhong Qian immediately recognizes that these horses could revolutionize Chinese military capabilities, giving their cavalry the size and strength needed to match the Xiongnu in direct combat. But the rulers of Dayuan are not eager to part with their most valuable assets. They explain to Zhong Qian that these horses are the foundation of their own military power and the source of their wealth through trade with neighboring kingdoms. However, they are willing to discuss terms for a limited exchange, particularly if the Chinese can offer goods that are equally valuable and difficult to obtain elsewhere. This conversation marks a crucial moment in the development of what will become the Silk Road. Zhong Qian realizes that successful trade relationships cannot be based on coercion or one-sided demands but must instead offer mutual benefits to all participants. The Chinese have goods that are highly prized in Central Asia, particularly silk, which is lighter and more valuable per unit weight than almost any other commodity. In exchange, these Western kingdoms can provide not only horses but also other luxury goods that are unknown in China: precious stones, exotic furs, aromatic woods, and new varieties of crops and livestock. When Zhong Qian finally locates the Yuezhi in their new homeland in Bactria, he discovers that his original diplomatic mission has been overtaken by events. The Yuezhi have established a comfortable new life in the fertile valleys of northern Afghanistan and have no interest in returning to fight their old enemies. They have intermarried with local populations, adopted new customs and technologies, and become prosperous through trade and agriculture. The prospect of a military alliance with distant China against the Xiongnu holds little appeal for people who have successfully moved beyond their past conflicts. However, the Yuezhi are very interested in developing commercial relationships with China. They have heard stories of Chinese silk and porcelain, and they are eager to establish regular trading connections that could bring these luxury goods to their new markets. They also offer to share their knowledge of routes and conditions further west, opening the possibility of trade connections that could extend all the way to the Mediterranean world. Zhong Qian spends nearly a year among the Yuezhi and their neighbors, learning about the political and economic relationships that govern this distant region. He discovers that Bactria is a crossroads where Indian, Persian, Greek, and Central Asian influences meet and blend, creating a cosmopolitan culture that is unlike anything found in China. The cities of this region are wealthy and sophisticated, with markets that display goods from across the known world and artisans who have mastered techniques unknown to Chinese craftsmen. Perhaps most importantly, Zhong Qian begins to understand that trade between distant regions is not just possible but potentially extremely profitable. The goods that are common and relatively inexpensive in one region may be exotic luxuries worth their weight in gold elsewhere. Chinese silk, which is beautiful but not extraordinarily expensive in China itself, can command enormous prices in markets where it is unknown and unobtainable through local production. Similarly, the horses of Fergana, while valuable in their homeland, become almost priceless when transported to China where no comparable animals exist. The return journey to China proves even more challenging than the outward trip. Zhong Qian and his remaining companions must again traverse hostile territory, avoiding both natural dangers and human enemies who would kill them for their possessions or sell them into slavery. They are captured once more by the Xiongnu, who are not pleased to discover that their former prisoner has been pursuing his original mission despite years of captivity. This time, however, Zhong Qian's imprisonment is brief, lasting only about a year before political changes among the nomads provide another opportunity for escape. When Zhong Qian finally returns to Chang'an in 126 BCE, 13 years after his departure, he is greeted as a hero despite the failure of his original diplomatic mission. Of the 100 men who began the journey, only he and Ganfu have survived to tell their tale. But the knowledge they bring back more than compensates for the human cost of their expedition. Zhong Qian's detailed reports about the geography, peoples, and resources of Central Asia provide Chinese strategists with invaluable intelligence about regions that were previously unknown. More significantly, Zhong Qian's accounts of the trade possibilities in the western regions capture the imagination of Chinese merchants and officials. His descriptions of the wealth that could be gained through commerce with distant peoples inspire a new vision of China's relationship with the outside world. Rather than viewing the western regions primarily as sources of military threat or potential allies, Chinese leaders begin to see them as opportunities for economic expansion and cultural exchange. Emperor Wu, initially disappointed by the failure to secure a military alliance with the Yuezhi, gradually comes to appreciate the broader implications of Zhong Qian's discoveries. The intelligence gathered during the expedition proves invaluable in subsequent military campaigns against the Xiongnu, while the knowledge of trade routes and commercial opportunities opens new possibilities for Chinese expansion that do not require military conquest. In the years following Zhong Qian's return, the Han court begins to implement policies designed to encourage and facilitate trade with the western regions. Military expeditions are organized not primarily for conquest but to establish secure trade routes and protect Chinese merchants. Diplomatic missions are sent to kingdoms that Zhong Qian had identified as potential trading partners. Most importantly, the Chinese government begins to view control of trade routes as a strategic objective worthy of significant investment and military effort. The transformation in Chinese thinking about the Western regions represents a fundamental shift in the relationship between civilization and the outside world. Previous Chinese dynasties had generally adopted a defensive posture, building walls and fortifications to keep foreign influences out while maintaining Chinese cultural purity. Under Emperor Wu, influenced by Zhong Qian's reports, China begins to embrace a more expansive and cosmopolitan vision that sees engagement with foreign peoples as a source of strength rather than contamination. This new approach requires significant changes in Chinese military and administrative practices. Traditional Chinese armies, composed primarily of infantry supported by small numbers of cavalry, prove inadequate for operations in the vast distances and difficult terrain of Central Asia. The Han military must develop new tactics, equipment, and logistical systems capable of projecting power across thousands of miles of desert and steppe. The solution involves not just military adaptation but also diplomatic innovation. Rather than attempting to conquer and directly govern the diverse peoples of Central Asia, the Chinese develop a system of tributary relationships that allows local rulers to maintain their authority while acknowledging Chinese supremacy and facilitating Chinese trade. This approach proves far more sustainable than direct military occupation, creating a network of allies and trading partners that extends Chinese influence without requiring the enormous expense of maintaining permanent garrisons in distant territories. The establishment of Chinese military colonies and trading posts in key locations along the emerging trade routes provides security for merchants while also serving as centers for cultural and technological exchange. These settlements become melting pots where Chinese officials and soldiers interact with local peoples, foreign merchants, and travelers from across Central Asia. The resulting cultural synthesis produces new forms of art, architecture, cuisine, and technology that blend influences from multiple civilizations. As news of the opportunities in the Western region spreads throughout the Chinese Empire, increasing numbers of merchants, craftsmen, and adventurers are drawn to participate in this new form of long-distance commerce. The goods that Zhong Qian had observed in his travels begin to flow eastward. In increasing quantities, while Chinese products move westward to markets that are eager for exotic luxuries from the Middle Kingdom. The development of regular trade relationships requires the creation of infrastructure and institutions that can support commercial activities across vast distances and multiple political jurisdictions. Caravanserais must be built to provide shelter and security for traveling merchants. Systems of credit and currency exchange must be developed to facilitate transactions between peoples who use different monetary systems. Legal frameworks must be established to resolve disputes and enforce contracts across cultural and linguistic boundaries. Perhaps most importantly, the emerging trade network requires the development of trust and mutual understanding between peoples who have very different customs, beliefs, and ways of life. Chinese merchants must learn to navigate the complex social protocols of Central Asian courts, while foreign traders must understand Chinese business practices and cultural expectations. This process of mutual adaptation creates the foundation for relationships that extend far beyond simple commercial transactions. The success of these early trading ventures attracts the attention of intermediary peoples who recognize the profit potential in facilitating commerce between China and the Western regions. The Sogdians, in particular, emerge as master middlemen who specialize in organizing and financing long-distance trading expeditions. Their knowledge of languages, routes, and local conditions makes them invaluable partners for Chinese merchants venturing into unfamiliar territories. The Sogdian trading network, which predates Zhong Qian's expedition but expands dramatically in response to increased Chinese participation, provides a model for how commerce can transcend political and cultural boundaries. Sogdian merchants establish communities in cities across Central Asia, creating a diaspora that facilitates communication and trade across enormous distances. Their commercial practices, including the use of standardized weights and measures, written contracts, and sophisticated credit arrangements, become the foundation for much of the long-distance trade that will characterize the Silk Road for centuries to come. As the volume and regularity of trade increases, the routes pioneered by Zhong Qian begin to evolve into the complex network of pathways that historians now call the Silk Road. These are not single roads carved through the landscape but rather a web of interconnected routes that adapt to changing political conditions, seasonal variations, and the specific requirements of different types of cargo. Merchants learn to choose their paths based on factors such as security, water availability, taxation policies, and market conditions at various destinations. The transformation of Zhong Qian's exploratory mission into the foundation of history's greatest trade network demonstrates how individual acts of courage and curiosity can have consequences that extend far beyond their original intentions. What began as a desperate attempt to find military allies against nomadic raiders evolved into a system of cultural and economic exchange that would connect civilizations across Eurasia for more than a millennium. The story of Zhong Qian and the origins of the Silk Road also illustrates the complex relationship between political authority and commercial innovation. While the initial impetus for exploration came from military necessity and imperial ambition, the lasting significance of these early expeditions lay in their revelation of possibilities for peaceful exchange and mutual benefit. The Chinese government's decision to support and protect trade rather than simply extracting tribute from conquered territories proved crucial to the long-term success of the Silk Road network. By the end of the 1st century BCE, barely 40 years after Zhong Qian's return from his epic journey, the basic framework of the Silk Road had been established. Regular caravans traveled between China and Central Asia, carrying silk, tea, and other Chinese goods westward while bringing horses, precious stones, and exotic products eastward. The foundations had been laid for a system of exchange that would eventually extend from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic, connecting civilizations that had never imagined each other's existence and creating the world's first truly global economy. The main routes, in the early morning light of a crisp autumn day in 200 CE, a caravan master named Liu Wei stands at the western gates of Chang'an, surveying the magnificent procession that stretches before him like a serpent of commerce ready to wind its way across the known world. 300 camels loaded with the finest silk, porcelain, and tea that Chinese artisans can produce stand in orderly rows, their bells chiming softly in the morning breeze. 50 armed guards check their weapons and supplies one final time, while 30 merchants and traders from various corners of the empire make their last preparations for a journey that will test every limit of human endurance and determination. Liu Wei has made this journey 7 times before, and each expedition has taught him something new about the intricate web of routes that connect east and west. Unlike the single road that some might imagine, the Silk Road is actually a complex network of pathways that branch and merge like the tributaries of a great river system, each route offering different advantages and challenges depending on the season, political conditions, and the specific cargo being transported. The choice of route is never simple, and Liu Wei must consider dozens of factors before making his decision. The northern routes through the Taklamakan Desert are shorter but more dangerous, with unpredictable sandstorms and limited water sources. The southern paths through the Tibetan Plateau and the Hindu Kush Mountains are longer but offer more reliable supplies and greater security from bandits. The political situation is constantly changing, with local rulers rising and falling, alliances shifting, and taxes being imposed or lifted based on the whims of distant potentates. Goods and trade. In the bustling marketplace of Samarkand on a warm summer morning in 750 CE, the merchant Ahmed ibn Yusuf examines a bolt of silk so fine that it seems to capture and hold the very essence of light itself. The fabric flows through his fingers like liquid starlight, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly luminescence that speaks of master craftsmen working in distant workshops where ancient secrets are passed down through generations of artisans. This single piece of cloth, no larger than a man can carry, represents wealth beyond the dreams of most people in the medieval world, and its journey from the mulberry groves of Sichuan to this Central Asian marketplace tells a story of human ingenuity, determination, and desire that spans continents and cultures. Ahmed is a Sogdian trader whose family has been involved in Silk Road commerce for 5 generations, and he understands better than most the complex economics that drive the great transcontinental trade network. The bolt of silk in his hands began its existence in carefully tended groves where mulberry trees provide sustenance for silkworms whose cocoons are harvested with techniques that have remained essentially unchanged for over 2,000 years. Chinese silk producers guard their methods with a secrecy that rivals state military secrets, knowing that their monopoly on this miraculous fiber represents one of their civilization's greatest strategic advantages. The transformation of silk cocoons into finished fabric requires skills and equipment that represent the culmination of centuries of technological development. Chinese artisans have perfected techniques for reeling silk fibers from cocoons, spinning them into thread of varying weights and textures, dyeing them in colors that range from subtle earth tones to brilliant jewel-like hues, and weaving them into patterns that combine practical functionality with artistic beauty. The most skilled weavers can create fabrics so complex that each piece represents months of painstaking labor, with patterns that tell stories or convey symbolic meanings understood only by those initiated into the mysteries of Chinese culture. For Ahmed and other Silk Road merchants, Chinese silk represents the ultimate luxury commodity. It is lightweight enough that a single camel can carry goods worth a small fortune, durable enough to survive the rigors of a journey that may last several years, and universally desired by wealthy customers throughout the known world. Roman patricians prize silk garments as symbols of sophistication and wealth. Persian nobles incorporate silk into elaborate court costumes, and Indian rulers use silk fabrics in religious ceremonies where their lustrous beauty is seen as appropriate for honoring the gods. But silk is only one of many precious goods that flow westward along the Silk Road routes. Chinese porcelain, known to foreign markets as a china, represents another technological marvel that commands enormous prices in distant markets. The techniques for creating true porcelain, with its translucent beauty and remarkable durability, remain a Chinese monopoly throughout the classical period of Silk Road trade. Foreign customers are amazed by vessels so thin that light passes through their walls yet so strong that they can withstand rough handling during transcontinental journeys. Chinese tea also finds eager markets throughout Central Asia and beyond, though its consumption requires education in brewing techniques and cultural practices that many foreign customers must learn from traveling Chinese merchants. The subtle flavors and alleged health benefits of tea create devoted followers wherever Chinese traders are able to demonstrate proper preparation methods, leading to the establishment of tea-drinking customs that persist long after the original Chinese merchants have moved on to other markets. Among the most significant Chinese exports are technologies and manufactured goods that represent revolutionary advances in human capability. Paper, invented in China during the Han Dynasty, gradually spreads westward along the Silk Road, replacing expensive parchment and papyrus in many applications. The lightweight, inexpensive nature of paper makes it ideal for long-distance trade, while its utility for record-keeping, correspondence, and literary purposes creates demand wherever literacy exists. Chinese innovations in metallurgy also find eager markets along the Silk Road. Steel produced using advanced Chinese smelting techniques proves superior to locally manufactured weapons and tools in most markets, while Chinese coins and mirrors demonstrate metalworking skills that foreign craftsmen struggle to duplicate. The famous Chinese invention of gunpowder, initially used primarily for fireworks and mining, gradually spreads westward through Silk Road contacts, eventually revolutionizing warfare throughout Eurasia. The spices and aromatics that Chinese merchants carry represent another category of high-value trade goods. Cinnamon, cloves, and other spices native to Chinese territories command enormous prices in Western markets where they are prized for both culinary and medicinal purposes. Chinese ginger, renowned for its superior quality and potency, becomes a standard treatment for digestive ailments throughout the medieval world, while Chinese medicinal herbs form the basis for pharmaceutical traditions that spread across multiple cultures. Moving in the opposite direction, the flow of goods from west to east tells an equally fascinating story of human desire and cultural exchange. Perhaps no single category of imports captivates Chinese imagination more than the magnificent horses bred in the valleys of Central Asia. These animals, particularly the famous, blood-sweating horses of Fergana, represent military technology that could revolutionize Chinese cavalry capabilities while also serving as symbols of imperial prestige and divine favor. The horses of Fergana and other Central Asian breeding centers are larger, stronger, and more enduring than the sturdy ponies native to China. Their superior size and strength make them ideal for heavy cavalry tactics that Chinese military leaders are eager to adopt, while their exotic appearance and legendary stamina make them perfect gifts for emperors who see possession of such magnificent beasts as evidence of their cosmic legitimacy. Chinese willingness to pay enormous prices for these horses, sometimes equivalent to the cost of several thousand bolts of silk, demonstrates how highly they value this particular import. The glass vessels and ornaments that arrive from Roman and Byzantine workshops represent another category of goods that fascinate Chinese customers with their technological sophistication and artistic beauty. The techniques for producing clear, colorless glass remain unknown to Chinese craftsmen throughout much of the classical period, making imported glassware highly prized among wealthy collectors. Roman glass vessels, with their delicate beauty and perfect transparency, often serve ceremonial purposes in Chinese temples and palaces where they are regarded as almost magical objects. Woolen textiles from Central Asian and Persian workshops offer Chinese customers access to garments suited for climates and conditions very different from those in China proper. The fine wool produced by sheep breeds adapted to high-altitude conditions provides warmth and durability that Chinese silk, for all its beauty, cannot match. Persian and Sogdian weavers create woolen carpets and tapestries whose intricate patterns and rich colors complement Chinese interior decoration while introducing foreign artistic motifs that influence Chinese design traditions. The precious stones and metals that flow eastward along the Silk Road represent some of the most concentrated wealth in the medieval economy. Lapis lazuli from Afghan mines, prized for its intense blue color, becomes essential for Chinese artists creating pigments for paintings and ceramics. Persian turquoise, Indian diamonds, and Central Asian garnets all find eager markets among Chinese jewelers and their wealthy customers. Gold and silver, whether in raw form or worked into ornamental objects, provide stores of value that transcend cultural boundaries and serve as universal media of exchange. Perhaps even more valuable than precious stones are the exotic aromatics that make their way eastward along the Silk Road. Frankincense and myrrh from Arabian sources become essential components of Chinese religious ceremonies, while Persian rose water and other distilled essences introduce new dimensions to Chinese perfumery and medicine. These aromatic substances often command prices that exceed their weight in gold, making them ideal commodities for long-distance trade despite the challenges of preserving their volatile properties during extended journeys. The spice trade represents one of the most lucrative categories of Silk Road commerce, with pepper, cardamom, and other exotic seasonings commanding enormous prices in Chinese markets where they are prized for both culinary and medicinal purposes. Black pepper from Indian sources becomes so valuable that it is sometimes used as currency in international transactions, while cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves from Southeast Asian sources create new flavors and experiences for Chinese cooks and diners. Ivory, both from African elephants and Asian sources, provides Chinese craftsmen with raw materials for creating decorative objects that combine practical utility with artistic beauty. The techniques for carving ivory into intricate sculptures and ornamental items become highly developed in Chinese workshops, where artisans create pieces that are prized throughout Asia for their delicate beauty and technical sophistication. The furs and leather goods that arrive from northern and western sources provide Chinese customers with materials suited for protection against harsh weather conditions while also serving as luxury items prized for their exotic origins. Sable and ermine from Siberian sources become symbols of imperial authority, while Persian lambskin and other specialty leathers are incorporated into Chinese fashion and interior decoration. Wine and other fermented beverages represent another significant category of westward-flowing goods. Chinese customers develop taste for wines produced in Central Asian regions where grape cultivation techniques and fermentation methods differ significantly from Chinese traditions. Persian and Sogdian wines, along with distilled spirits from various sources, introduce new flavors and drinking customs that influence Chinese social practices and ceremonial traditions. The exchange of books, maps, and written materials represents a category of trade that transcends simple commercial considerations. Foreign texts on subjects such as astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy provide Chinese scholars with access to knowledge traditions developed in very different cultural contexts. Similarly, Chinese texts on subjects such as philosophy, poetry, and technical subjects find eager audiences among foreign scholars and religious practitioners. The complexity of Silk Road commerce extends far beyond simple exchanges of finished goods. Raw materials, semi-finished products, and technical knowledge also flow along the trade routes, creating opportunities for craftsmen and entrepreneurs throughout the network. Chinese silk threads might be woven into finished fabrics by Persian artisans who combine Chinese materials with local design traditions, while Central Asian metalworkers might create finished products using Chinese steel and local decorative techniques. The financial mechanisms that support Silk Road trade represent sophisticated solutions to challenges that arise from conducting commerce across vast distances and multiple political jurisdictions. Sogdian banking houses develop systems of credit and currency exchange that allow merchants to conduct business without carrying large quantities of precious metals across dangerous territories. Letters of credit issued by established banking houses are honored throughout the network, creating a system of international finance that facilitates trade while reducing risks. The standardization of weights, measures, and quality standards becomes crucial to the success of long-distance trade. Merchants and their customers must have confidence that goods purchased in one location will meet agreed-upon specifications when they arrive at distant destinations. Sogdian and other intermediary merchants develop reputations for reliability that become valuable business assets, while the development of standard measures for silk quality, precious metal purity, and other important characteristics facilitates transactions between parties who may never meet face to face. The seasonal nature of much Silk Road trade creates complex planning challenges that successful merchants must master. The timing of caravan departures must coordinate with weather patterns, political conditions, and market cycles in multiple locations. Successful traders develop detailed knowledge of seasonal price variations in different markets, allowing them to optimize their profits by timing purchases and sales to take advantage of predictable patterns. The insurance and risk-sharing mechanisms that evolved to support Silk Road trade represent early forms of commercial practices that remain important in modern international commerce. Merchants organize partnerships that spread risks among multiple investors, while professional insurers begin to offer policies that protect against losses due to natural disasters, political upheavals, and criminal activities. These financial innovations make it possible for merchants with limited capital to participate in highly profitable but risky long-distance trading ventures. The development of specialized trading communities and commercial districts in major Silk Road cities creates environments that facilitate complex international transactions. Foreign merchants' quarters in cities such as Chang'an, Samarkand, and Constantinople provide secure environments where traders can conduct business according to familiar customs and legal traditions while also offering opportunities for cross-cultural exchange and learning. The role of women in Silk Road commerce, though often overlooked in traditional historical accounts, proves significant in many contexts. Female merchants, particularly in Central Asian societies, sometimes operate trading businesses independently or in partnership with male relatives. Women also play crucial roles in the production of many traded goods, from silk weaving to food processing, while their labor in managing households and families makes it possible for male merchants to undertake extended trading journeys. The impact of Silk Road trade on local economies throughout the network varies considerably depending on geographic location, political conditions, and the specific goods being traded. Some communities become wealthy and cosmopolitan through their participation in long-distance commerce, while others find their traditional economic patterns disrupted by competition from foreign products or changes in trade routes. The overall effect, however, is to create unprecedented levels of economic integration and cultural exchange across Eurasia. The technologies of transportation and storage that developed to support Silk Road commerce represent significant innovations in logistics and supply chain management. Specialized pack animals, improved saddles and harnesses, better preservation techniques for perishable goods, and more efficient loading and unloading procedures all contribute to reducing costs and improving reliability. These technological improvements make it economically feasible to transport goods across greater distances and expand the range of products that can profitably participate in long-distance trade. The legal and regulatory frameworks that emerge to govern Silk Road commerce reflect the need for predictable rules and dispute resolution mechanisms that can operate across cultural and political boundaries. Commercial law codes, arbitration procedures, and diplomatic agreements create stable environments for trade while also providing mechanisms for adapting to changing conditions and resolving conflicts that inevitably arise in such complex international relationships. The legacy of Silk Road trade patterns can be seen in modern global commerce, where many of the same principles and practices continue to operate despite dramatic changes in technology and political organization. The fundamental logic of comparative advantage, where different regions specialize in producing goods for which they have natural or cultural advantages, remains central to international trade. Similarly, the importance of reliable transportation networks, financial systems, and legal frameworks for supporting complex commercial relationships continues to shape how modern businesses operate in global markets. Today, Liu Wei has chosen to take the northern route, gambling that the recent peace treaty between the Chinese and the kingdoms of Kushan will ensure safe passage through the most dangerous sections of the journey. His caravan will follow what traders call the Desert Road, a path that skirts the northern edge of the terrifying Taklamakan Desert while remaining close enough to the oasis cities that dot the region to ensure access to water and supplies. The first major destination lies 800 miles to the west, the city of Dunhuang, known throughout Central Asia as the Jade Gate, the last outpost of Chinese civilization before the caravan enters the truly foreign lands beyond. Dunhuang serves as more than just a way station. It is a crucial depot where merchants can reorganize their loads, hire local guides familiar with the desert routes, and gather intelligence about conditions further west. The city's markets offer the last opportunity to purchase Chinese goods at reasonable prices, while its temples and monasteries provide spiritual preparation for the trials ahead. From Dunhuang, the northern route splits into several branches, each following the string of oasis cities that make survival possible in one of the world's most hostile environments. The primary path leads northwest toward Turpan, an extraordinary city built in a depression that lies more than 500 feet below sea level. Despite its seemingly impossible location, Turpan thrives due to an ingenious irrigation system called caravans, underground channels that tap into mountain snowmelt and distribute water throughout the oasis without losing precious moisture to evaporation. The journey from Dunhuang to Turpan typically takes 3 weeks, crossing terrain that alternates between rocky desert, sand dunes, and salt flats where nothing grows and the only sounds are the wind and the steady rhythm of camel hooves. Water sources are carefully mapped and jealously guarded, with each oasis representing not just relief from the desert's harshness but also opportunities for trade, information gathering, and cultural exchange. At Turpan, merchants encounter one of the Silk Road's most remarkable phenomena, a city where multiple cultures, languages, and religions coexist in relative harmony, creating a cosmopolitan atmosphere that rivals any urban center in the ancient world. Chinese traders share market stalls with Sogdian middlemen, Persian craftsmen work alongside Buddhist monks, and Zoroastrian fire temples stand within sight of Confucian academies. The city's prosperity depends on its ability to serve as a neutral meeting ground where political and religious differences are set aside in favor of commercial cooperation. From Turpan, the northern route continues westward toward Kasha, perhaps the most important trading hub in all of Central Asia. Located at the confluence of several major routes, Kasha serves as the crossroads where the northern and southern paths around the Taklamakan Desert reconverge, where traders coming from China meet those arriving from India, Persia, and the Mediterranean world. The city's famous Sunday market draws merchants from thousands of miles away, creating a weekly festival of commerce that showcases goods from across the known world. The approach to Kasha from the east requires crossing some of the most challenging terrain on the entire Silk Road. The route leads through the Tian Shan Mountains, where narrow passes wind between peaks that reach toward the sky like the fingers of giants. In winter, these passes can be completely blocked by snow, forcing caravans to wait for months until the spring thaw opens the way forward. Even in summer, the high altitude and unpredictable weather create conditions that test the limits of both human and animal endurance. But the difficulties of reaching Kasha are more than compensated by the opportunities the city offers. Here, Chinese silk meets Indian cotton, Persian carpets are traded for Roman glassware, and Central Asian horses are exchanged for Arabian incense. The city's bazaars are legendary for their variety and quality, while its caravanserais provide secure accommodation for traveling merchants and their precious cargoes. From Kasha, traders face a crucial decision that will determine the character of their entire journey westward. They can continue northwest towards Samarkand and the great cities of Sogdiana, or they can turn southwest toward Bactria and the routes that lead to India and Persia. Each choice offers different opportunities and challenges, different markets and obstacles, different cultural encounters and potential profits. The northwestern route from Kasha leads across the Pamir Mountains, often called the roof of the world, where the air becomes so thin that both men and animals struggle for breath. This path requires crossing passes that rise more than 15,000 feet above sea level, where the cold is so intense that it can kill the unprepared and where sudden storms can trap caravans for days or weeks. Yet despite these dangers, this route remains popular because it leads directly to Samarkand, the jewel of the Sogdian cities and one of the wealthiest markets in the world. Samarkand represents everything that makes the Silk Road extraordinary. Built at the intersection of routes from China, India, Persia, and the Mediterranean, the city has grown fabulously wealthy by serving as a neutral trading ground where merchants from all corners of the known world can meet and conduct business. Its markets offer goods that cannot be found anywhere else, from Chinese porcelain to Indian spices, from Persian textiles to European amber. The city's rulers have created an environment that actively encourages international trade. Taxes are reasonable, security is generally reliable, and the legal system provides mechanisms for resolving disputes between merchants from different cultural backgrounds. Most importantly, Samarkand has developed a sophisticated financial system that allows traders to conduct business without carrying large amounts of precious metals across dangerous territory. Letters of credit issued by Sogdian banking houses are honored throughout Central Asia, creating a network of financial relationships that facilitates commerce across vast distances. From Samarkand, the northern route continues westward through a landscape of ancient cities and forgotten kingdoms. Bukhara, another Sogdian metropolis, rivals Samarkand in wealth and cosmopolitan atmosphere while specializing in particular types of goods such as carpets, textiles, and worked metals. The city's craftsmen are famous throughout the Islamic world for their skill in creating intricate patterns and designs that blend influences from multiple artistic traditions. Beyond Bukhara, the route enters the domain of the Sassanid Persian Empire, where travelers encounter a very different political and cultural environment. The Persians maintain tighter control over trade than the more commercially minded Sogdians, imposing higher taxes and more restrictive regulations on foreign merchants. However, Persian cities offer access to goods that are unavailable elsewhere, particularly luxury items such as precious stones, rare spices, and exotic textiles. The Persian section of the route includes cities such as Merv, known for its scholars and libraries, and Nishapur, famous for its turquoise mines and skilled metalworkers. These urban centers represent the western terminus of the overland routes from China, the points where goods from the Far East are transferred to merchants who will carry them further westward to the markets of the Byzantine Empire and the Mediterranean world. The southern route around the Taklamakan Desert offers a very different experience for travelers willing to accept longer distances in exchange for greater security and more reliable supplies. This path leads from Dunhuang southwest to the city of Miron, then continues around the southern edge of the desert through a chain of oasis settlements that includes Naya, Khotan, and Yarkand before rejoining the northern route at Kasha. The southern route's great advantage lies in its access to the legendary kingdom of Khotan, source of the finest jade in the ancient world and home to craftsmen whose skill in working this precious stone is unmatched anywhere else. Khotan jade, prized for its beauty and believed to possess magical properties, commands enormous prices in Chinese markets, making the extra time and distance required to reach this remote kingdom highly profitable for merchants willing to make the effort. The journey along the southern route also provides access to trade connections with the Indian subcontinent through mountain passes that lead over the Karakoram and Hindu Kush ranges. These connections open up entirely different markets and sources of goods, including the spices, precious stones, and cotton textiles that make Indian Ocean trade so profitable. However, the mountain routes to India are among the most dangerous on the entire Silk Road network, with narrow paths carved into cliff faces and bridges that span terrifying gorges. The development of maritime routes represents a crucial evolution in the Silk Road network that becomes increasingly important during the Tang dynasty and the medieval period. These sea routes begin at Chinese ports such as Guangzhou and Quanzhou, following the coastlines of Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean to reach markets in India, the Persian Gulf, and eventually the Red Sea and Mediterranean. The maritime Silk Road offers several advantages over the overland routes. Ships can carry much larger and heavier cargoes than camel caravans, making it economical to transport bulk goods such as rice, timber, and metals that would be prohibitively expensive to move overland. Sea travel is also generally faster and more comfortable than desert crossings, allowing merchants to complete round trips in less time and with lower mortality rates. However, maritime trade also presents unique challenges and risks. Ships must navigate monsoon seasons, avoid pirates and hostile navies, and deal with the complex political situation in Southeast Asia where numerous kingdoms and city-states compete for control of crucial straits and harbors. The technical requirements for successful sea trade are also more demanding, requiring specialized knowledge of navigation, shipbuilding, and weather patterns. The Chinese development of maritime capabilities during the Tang and Song periods represents a major expansion of their participation in international trade. Chinese shipbuilders create vessels that are larger and more seaworthy than anything previously seen in Asian waters, while Chinese navigators develop sophisticated techniques for determining position and course at sea. These technological advances allow Chinese merchants to establish direct trade relationships with distant markets, reducing their dependence on foreign intermediaries. The ports that serve the maritime Silk Road become cosmopolitan centers that rival the great cities of the overland routes. Guangzhou develops into China's primary international port, with foreign quarters that house merchants from across Asia and beyond. The city's markets offer goods from throughout the known world, while its temples and residential areas reflect the diverse cultural influences that maritime trade brings to China. Further south, ports such as Palembang in Sumatra and Malacca on the Malay Peninsula emerge as crucial stopping points for ships traveling between China and the Indian Ocean. These cities develop their own trading networks and cultural identities while serving as intermediaries between the Chinese and Indian spheres of influence. Their rulers become wealthy and powerful by taxing trade and providing services to merchant vessels. The Arabian Peninsula plays a crucial role in connecting the maritime and overland segments of the Silk Road network. Ports such as Sohar and Muscat in Oman serve as transshipment points where goods arriving by sea from China and India are transferred to caravans that will carry them overland to markets in Mesopotamia and the Levant. Similarly, goods from the Mediterranean world are concentrated at these ports for shipment eastward to Asian markets. The development of multiple route options creates a competitive environment that drives innovation and efficiency improvements throughout the Silk Road network. Merchants must constantly evaluate different pathways based on factors such as security, cost, travel time, and market conditions at various destinations. This competition encourages local rulers to improve infrastructure, reduce taxes, and provide better services in order to attract trade to their territories. The seasonal nature of much Silk Road travel adds another layer of complexity to route planning. Winter conditions make high mountain passes impassable, while summer heat in desert regions can be deadly for both humans and animals. Monsoon patterns in the Indian Ocean dictate the timing of maritime voyages, while political instability can suddenly render previously safe routes too dangerous to use. Successful merchants develop detailed knowledge of these cyclical patterns, planning their journeys to take advantage of favorable conditions while avoiding predictable hazards. This expertise becomes a valuable commodity in itself, with experienced caravan leaders and ship captains commanding high fees for their knowledge of routes and conditions. The infrastructure that develops to support Silk Road trade represents one of humanity's earliest examples of international cooperation in creating public goods. Caravanserais, bridges, wells, and other facilities require coordination between multiple political entities and significant financial investment from both governments and private merchants. The fact that this infrastructure is built and maintained despite the absence of any overarching political authority demonstrates the powerful economic incentives that drive long-distance trade. The route network of the Silk Road also facilitates the transmission of information, ideas, and technologies along with commercial goods. News of political developments, natural disasters, and market conditions travels along the trade routes, allowing merchants and rulers to make informed decisions about their activities. Similarly, religious ideas, artistic styles, and technical innovations spread along these same pathways, creating cultural exchanges that are often more significant than the commercial transactions that enable them. The flexibility and adaptability of the Silk Road route network prove crucial to its longevity and success. As political conditions change, new routes are developed while others are abandoned. As new technologies emerge, the network evolves to take advantage of improved transportation methods and communication systems. As markets develop and change, the routes adapt to serve new sources of supply and demand. This adaptability allows the Silk Road to survive and prosper for more than a millennium despite dramatic changes in the political, technological, and economic environment. The basic principle of connecting distant markets through a network of interconnected routes proves robust enough to accommodate everything from the rise and fall of empires to the development of new transportation technologies and the discovery of new sources of valuable goods. The legacy of the Silk Road route network can be seen in modern transportation and communication systems that continue to follow many of the same basic pathways established by ancient merchants. Airlines, railways, and highways often follow routes that were first pioneered by camel caravans, while modern telecommunications networks frequently parallel the paths that once carried news and information across continents. Understanding the development and evolution of the Silk Road route network provides valuable insights into how complex systems of international cooperation can emerge and thrive even in the absence of formal political institutions. The merchants, rulers, and communities that created and maintained these routes demonstrated that mutual benefit and shared interests can overcome cultural differences and political conflicts to create lasting frameworks for peaceful interaction and exchange. Cultural and religious impact. In the year 629 CE, a young Chinese monk named Xuanzang stands at the edge of the Gobi Desert, his simple brown robes fluttering in the relentless wind that carries sand and possibility in equal measure across the vast expanse before him. Behind him lies the familiar world of Tang Dynasty China, with its ordered cities, ancient traditions, and the comfortable certainties of a civilization that considers itself the center of the universe. Ahead stretches an unknown landscape of desert and mountain, populated by peoples whose languages, customs, and beliefs are as foreign to him as the distant stars. Xuanzang carries with him no goods for trade, no weapons for protection, and no wealth to ease his journey. Instead, he bears something far more precious and dangerous, an unquenchable thirst for knowledge and truth that will drive him across 16 years and 10,000 miles of the most challenging terrain on Earth. His quest is spiritual rather than commercial, seeking authentic Buddhist scriptures and teachings that he believes can only be found at their source in the great monasteries and universities of India. Yet his journey will become one of the most important cultural exchanges in human history, demonstrating how the Silk Road served as a conduit not just for goods and wealth, but for ideas, beliefs, and ways of understanding the world that would transform entire civilizations. The story of Buddhism spread along the Silk Road begins centuries before Xuanzang's epic journey, in the aftermath of Alexander the Great's conquests in Central Asia and northern India. When Alexander's armies withdrew, they left behind a network of Greek kingdoms and cultural influences that created a unique fusion of Hellenistic and Asian traditions. In this cosmopolitan environment, Buddhism encountered artistic and philosophical traditions very different from those of its Indian birthplace, leading to new forms of religious expression that would prove particularly well suited to transmission along the trade routes. The Kingdom of Gandhara, located in what is now Afghanistan and Pakistan, became the crucible where Buddhism first adapted itself to the demands of cross-cultural communication. Gandharan artists, trained in Greek sculptural techniques but inspired by Buddhist spiritual ideals, created the first anthropomorphic images of the Buddha, giving human form to a figure who had previously been represented only through symbols. These sculptures, with their Greek-influenced drapery and realistic facial features, made Buddhist concepts accessible to peoples who were more familiar with personalized deities than abstract philosophical principles. As Gandharan Buddhism spread northward into Central Asia, it encountered the practical challenges of serving communities scattered across vast distances and harsh landscapes. Buddhist monasteries began to serve not just as centers of religious practice but also as way stations for traveling merchants, providing shelter, medical care, and spiritual comfort to traders who faced constant dangers on their journeys. This practical adaptation of Buddhism to the needs of Silk Road commerce created a symbiotic relationship that would persist for centuries. The cave temples of Dunhuang, where Xuanzang likely stopped during his westward journey, represent one of the most remarkable achievements of this fusion between Buddhism and Silk Road culture. Beginning in the 4th century CE, monks and local patrons carved more than 400 caves into the cliff faces near this crucial oasis city, creating a complex of religious sites that served as both a major pilgrimage destination and a practical resource for traveling merchants and their caravans. The frescoes and sculptures that fill these caves tell the story of Buddhism's adaptation to Central Asian conditions and sensibilities. Local artists incorporated design elements from Persian, Turkish, and Chinese traditions while depicting Buddhist stories and teachings. The result is an art form that is neither purely Indian nor purely Chinese but something entirely new, a visual language that could communicate Buddhist concepts to people from diverse cultural backgrounds who gathered in this cosmopolitan trading center. The monastery libraries at Dunhuang preserved manuscripts in more than 20 different languages and scripts, reflecting the international character of Buddhism along the Silk Road. Chinese pilgrims like Xuanzang could study Sanskrit texts alongside Turkish translations, Persian commentaries, and original compositions by Central Asian monks who had developed their own interpretations of Buddhist doctrine. This multilingual scholarship created an intellectual environment that rivaled the great universities of the ancient world in its scope and sophistication. The practical challenges of maintaining Buddhist communities along the Silk Road led to significant innovations in religious organization and practice. Unlike the large monastic institutions of India and China, Central Asian Buddhism developed forms that were more portable and adaptable to the nomadic and semi-nomadic lifestyles of many regional populations. Traveling monks carried portable shrines and ritual objects that could be quickly assembled for ceremonies, while oral traditions became especially important for preserving and transmitting teachings in communities that might not have permanent access to written texts. The economic relationship between Buddhism and Silk Road trade created complex dynamics that shaped both religious and commercial practices. Wealthy merchants often sponsored the construction of temples, monasteries, and other religious institutions as acts of merit-making that they believed would bring spiritual benefits and practical protection during dangerous journeys. These donations created a cycle of patronage that supported Buddhist institutions while also providing traders with access to networks of religious communities that could offer assistance throughout the trade routes. Buddhist monks, in turn, often served as more than just spiritual advisors to traveling merchants. Their literacy skills made them valuable as scribes and translators, while their international connections could provide crucial intelligence about political conditions, route safety, and market opportunities in distant regions. Some monks even engaged directly in trade, using commercial activities to fund their religious missions and to create opportunities for spreading Buddhist teachings among merchant communities. The transmission of Buddhism eastward into China represents one of the most significant cultural transformations in human history, a process that unfolded gradually over several centuries as Chinese intellectuals encountered Buddhist ideas through Silk Road contacts. The initial reception of Buddhism in China was complex and sometimes contentious, as Chinese scholars struggled to reconcile Buddhist concepts with established Confucian and Taoist traditions. The foreign origins of Buddhism made some Chinese suspicious of its motives and implications, while its emphasis on renunciation and monastic celibacy seemed to contradict fundamental Chinese values regarding family obligations and social harmony. However, Buddhism's emphasis on compassion, moral conduct, and the alleviation of suffering resonated deeply with many Chinese, particularly during periods of political instability and social upheaval when traditional certainties seemed inadequate to address human suffering. Buddhist concepts of karma and rebirth provided explanations for injustice and inequality that complemented rather than contradicted indigenous Chinese beliefs about cosmic order and moral balance. The gradual Sinicization of Buddhism involved creative adaptations that made foreign concepts comprehensible within Chinese cultural frameworks while maintaining essential Buddhist principles. The role of Silk Road merchants in transmitting Buddhist ideas cannot be overstated. These practical men of commerce often served as informal missionaries, carrying Buddhist concepts along with their trade goods and introducing religious ideas to communities that might never have encountered formal Buddhist teachers. The merchant communities that established themselves in major Chinese cities often included Buddhist practitioners who built temples and sponsored religious activities that attracted local interest and participation. The Chinese development of distinctive forms of Buddhism, particularly Chan Buddhism, which later became known as Zen in Japan, demonstrates how Silk Road cultural transmission was never simply a matter of passive reception but rather involved creative synthesis and innovation. Chinese Buddhist thinkers like Huineng and Mazu drew upon Taoist concepts and Chinese literary traditions to create forms of Buddhist practice that were deeply rooted in Chinese culture while remaining authentically Buddhist in their essential insights. When Xuanzang finally reached the great university at Nalanda in northern India, he encountered a form of Buddhism that was both familiar and startlingly different from what he had known in China. The Indian Buddhism of the 7th century was highly scholastic and philosophical, emphasizing detailed analysis of doctrine and elaborate ritual practices that contrasted sharply with the more practical and intuitive approaches that had developed in Chinese contexts. Xuanzang's studies at Nalanda and other Indian centers provided him with access to Sanskrit texts and oral traditions that had been lost or corrupted during their transmission to China, allowing him to correct errors and fill gaps in Chinese Buddhist literature. The return journey of Xuanzang and his companions, laden with hundreds of Sanskrit manuscripts and sacred relics, represents one of the most successful cultural transfer projects in human history. The translation workshop that Xuanzang established in Chang'an upon his return became the center of a systematic effort to render Indian Buddhist literature into Chinese, creating standardized terminologies and interpretive frameworks that would influence Chinese Buddhism for centuries to come. But Buddhism was not the only religious tradition that spread along the Silk Road. The rise of Islam in the 7th century created a new dynamic that would eventually transform much of Central Asia from a predominantly Buddhist region into the Islamic heartland it remains today. The Islamic conquest of Persian territories and the subsequent expansion into Central Asia brought Arabic language, Islamic law, and Muslim cultural practices into contact with established Buddhist, Zoroastrian, and local religious traditions. The process of Islamization along the Silk Road was gradual and complex, often involving syncretic blending of Islamic concepts with local traditions rather than simple replacement of one religious system by another. Many Central Asian populations maintained elements of their traditional practices while adopting Islamic identities, creating distinctive forms of Islam that reflected local cultural influences. The mystical traditions of Sufism proved particularly well adapted to Central Asian conditions, offering spiritual practices that could accommodate nomadic lifestyles and cultural traditions that predated Islamic arrival. The Islamic period of Silk Road history saw the emergence of great centers of learning and culture in cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Baghdad, where scholars from diverse backgrounds collaborated in translating and preserving the intellectual heritage of multiple civilizations. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad became a focal point for this multicultural scholarly activity, where Arabic, Persian, Greek, Sanskrit, and Chinese texts were translated and studied by international communities of scholars. Islamic scholars along the Silk Road made crucial contributions to the preservation and transmission of classical knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. Greek philosophical and scientific texts, Indian mathematical and astronomical works, and Chinese technological innovations were all preserved in Arabic translations that later became the basis for intellectual development in both the Islamic world and medieval Europe. The Islamic Golden Age, which roughly corresponds to the height of Silk Road trade, represents one of the most remarkable periods of cross-cultural learning and intellectual synthesis in human history.